biggest mistake that a lot of people make, and I've seen that in many of my clients as well, is they think about AI as just some kind of technology or some kind of architecture. AI needs to be deeply embedded into the holistic organizational culture as well. And it's really not just about the technology, but it's also about the human psyche and the mindset that actually helps us to deliver the right kind of outcomes.
Fragmented and reactive tools and manual workflows drive unscheduled downtime, costing enterprises over $725 billion annually.
We are transitioning from automation to autonomy. Automation essentially is focused on how to think and how to reason and then act accordingly so as to deliver the right kind of outcomes.
Ebliss AI is an AI-native platform designed to power the future of autonomous operations. In a world where fragmented and reactive tools and manual workflows drive unscheduled downtime, costing enterprises over $725 billion annually. Shirish Nimgaonkar is a serial entrepreneur driven by one core belief: technology should elevate human potential, not exhaust it. Across multiple ventures, he has focused on building systems that scale impact while reducing friction for people and organizations. As an entrepreneur in residence at Harvard and a longtime mentor with TIE, he's committed to helping founders build ideas that scale real-world impact.
While you do focus on the technology aspects of it and the large-scale macro aspects, it is also grounded in terms of what it takes from an execution standpoint to deliver real value to customers. So it brings about the combination of macro trends, the technology pieces, and also the execution details, which I think is very, very important in terms of being able to not only think about where the world is headed, but in terms of what are the building blocks of it and what it takes to create impact at scale. And that is truly exciting about this show.
AI replaces reactive firefighting with predictive, self-healing intelligence that keeps... All right, everybody, welcome to the AI Space Podcast. AI isn't just a future, it's a force rewriting the rules of business, wealth creation, and society. If you're a founder, innovator, or technologist, this is the AI show for you. The question you have to ask yourself is, will I blaze a path, follow the crowd, or be left in the dust? This is season 2, the 12th episode, and we're thrilled to have Shirish Nimgaonkar, founder and CEO of eBliss AI. I'm Sanjay Kalluvilayil, creator and host of the AI Space Podcast, founder and CEO of Stonehouse Advisors, your trusted advisor for AI founders and businesses focused on go-to-market strategy and execution. Shirish, first of all, welcome. But on the AI Space Podcast, we jump right into highlighting game-changing insights that help founders drive innovation and scale business initiatives. Once again, welcome. But what do you see as the key trends in AI going forward?
Firstly, Sanjay, thanks so much. It's great to be here. AI has profoundly changed our lives and will continue to do so over the next several decades. Stepping back, there's been a lot of evolution that we have seen in the marketplace, but essentially from a high level, there are 3 really big changes happening in the AI world. Firstly, we are transitioning from automation to autonomy. And that's a very, very big difference. Automation essentially focuses on executing the same sequence of steps every time, whereas automation essentially is focused on how to think and how to reason and then act accordingly so as to deliver the right kind of outcomes. Secondly, there is going to be a lot more focus on making sure that we are achieving the right kind of outcomes through AI and hence delivering an ROI as opposed to just focusing on the process of experimentation. And thirdly, there's going to be a lot more focus on what we call as invisible AI, which is AI actually working silently in the background in a very calm way to help us deliver the outcomes and elevate our overall experience, as opposed to AI actually being attention grabbing and really in our faces. And so a combination of autonomy, outcomes, and invisibility is what is going to make AI really powerful over the next few years.
Yeah, I like that concept of invisible AI, and we'll definitely dive deeper into that. If you look back upon 2025, right, maybe what's one most surprising insight, whether it's positive or negative, that's making you take a step back and look and say, hey, maybe I need to reshift or rethink how I approach 2026?
Essentially, the biggest mistake that a lot of people make, and I've seen that in many of my clients as well, is they think about AI as just some kind of technology or some kind of architecture. essentially AI needs to be deeply embedded into the holistic organizational culture as well. And it's really not just about the technology, but it's also about the human psyche and the mindset that actually helps us to deliver the right kind of outcomes. So we actually quite underestimated the whole human part in terms of what is required for AI adoption and essentially executing it in the right way to deliver the right kind of value. So making sure that humans are really involved deeply in terms of thinking about what an AI solution can look like and what are the best ways to expedite adoption has been one of the biggest learnings, and that will continue to be the case.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to dive deeper into the human aspect of it going to 2026. What do you see as the top AI strategies to grow and scale a business?
Well, when we look back at how we have evolved eBliss and where have we had some of the biggest learnings in terms of scalability and growth, we essentially have seen perhaps three categories. One is what we just talked about, which is the need to focus on outcomes and hence make sure that you're delivering tangible, immediate ROI, and the ROI grows over a period of time. Number two, there has to be ease of adoption. So making sure that it integrates well into your existing workflows and there isn't too much friction in terms of how it is perceived or there should not be too much effort that goes into ways in which you can integrate it better. And number three, it has to be safe, which means there has to be a lot of transparency, auditability, and accountability as well. So a combination of attractiveness, ease of adoption, and safety is essential for making sure that any of these AI solutions and hence companies scale well over a period of time.
Yeah, no, I truly appreciate this perspective. Now we can take a step back, we can breathe, relax a little bit. I'll tell the folks a little bit more about eBliss AI and yourself, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your journey. So, eBliss AI is an AI native platform designed to power the future of autonomous operations. In a world where fragmented and reactive tools and manual workflows drive unscheduled downtime, costing enterprises over $725 billion annually, eBliss AI automates the detection, diagnosis, resolution, and prediction of dynamic enterprise IT issues before people even notice. eBliss AI replaces reactive firefighting with predictive, self-healing intelligence that keeps systems running smoothly across devices and environments. Shirish Nimgaonkar is a serial entrepreneur driven by one core belief: technology should elevate human potential, not exhaust it. Across multiple ventures, he has focused on building systems that scale impact while reducing friction for people and organizations. As an entrepreneur in residence at Harvard and a longtime mentor with TIE, he's committed to helping founders build ideas that scale real-world impact. Well, Shirish, it's awesome to have you here. Thank you for your time. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background and what led you to this foray into AI? Maybe start off with your education. I know you were at IIT Bombay, Stanford, Harvard. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Oh, so from a very early age, I was excited by the prospect of experimentation. I always had a strong inclination towards math and sciences. At the same time, I was also a very active musician. So I trained in classical music, and that led me into different kinds of fields from a learning and experimentation standpoint. And then when I joined IIT Bombay, it was clearly a very rigorous environment for me to learn and grow in. From there, I was fortunate enough to be accepted to Stanford, a great place right in the middle of Silicon Valley, where I was introduced to how to run effective experiments and hence essentially think about the macro aspects of innovation. So while IT taught me a lot about rigor and math and science, Stanford was essentially a foray into the art of experimentation and essentially an introduction into how to think about starting and growing companies. And then when I joined Harvard for my MBA, that was essentially a crash course into thinking about the human aspects, which are essential and, in fact, very critical for delivering the right kind of impact in our society, essentially. So it was a great transition from rigor to experimentation to essentially the human aspects of creating impact and building relationships.
Cool. And was there a specific type of classical music you were in, specific genre?
In classical music, when I was growing up, so I'm a vocalist. I also do quite a few music shows every year. So I've done a lot of large fundraisers for several different organizations. In the process of doing a lot of these shows, what I figured out was that essentially is a lot of commonality between how you think about music and how do you think about the art of performance, what you do essentially in starting and growing even any of these technology companies, right? So there's always needs to be a strong focus on the customer. In the case of music, that is the audience. Number one, you're always rapidly experimenting to figure out what is the right combination of genres of music or ragas in the case of Indian music, to figure out what is it that the audience might be looking for. And number three, you have to improvise on stage and hence perform under pressure. And all of these are quite transferable to starting and growing companies and essentially making sure that the solutions can be adopted in the right way by the customers and you're able to deliver value and create tangible human impact.
Yeah, the reason I ask that too is that music people see as an art form, but there's a very mathematical component to that, and even languages like Sanskritam or Sanskrit, right? If you look at the Fibonacci series, people don't realize that it was actually during the Enlightenment, with the connection with India, that they were exposed to some of the concepts, and especially in Sanskrit, the way the syllables go, there's a mathematical formula to that influenced the Fibonacci series. So, any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. So the whole concept of Indian classical music, which is the raga, essentially is quite structured and mathematical, right? Where you can think about what are the different notes and essentially the sequences of notes, how do you construct certain compositions and so on and so forth. And then you add, subtract, you sort of look at all different kinds of permutations and combinations, and then you want to arrive at some kind of an outcome, but make sure that the outcome also appeals to the audience. So it's a great combination of math and human impact and emotion. And I think that actually translates well even into a lot of what we're doing from a technology business standpoint as well.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about some of your early roles into how you got into what you're doing right now.
I was trained in math and operations research, which is a precursor or perhaps has a lot of overlap with the modern day AI. Essentially thinking about patterns and sequences and ways in which you can effectively predict based on what has happened in the past, and how do you create these self-learning systems that essentially scale over a period of time. So that's what I studied at IIT and also at Stanford. And that was a great academic training ground. And of course, that has to be combined with real life learning and experimentation. More importantly, the art of building the right kind of relationships, navigating complex enterprise environments, and so on and so forth, which I started doing in the context of what I learned at Harvard and subsequently in all my different roles. So while I had strong academic training plus structure to think about relationships and impact during business school, a lot of the real life learning actually happened when I started getting into different kinds of roles after Stanford and also after Harvard. So I started with Intel in Silicon Valley, which was a great training ground for a lot of the senior leaders and managers in Silicon Valley. I was grilled in the art of withstanding high levels of pressure and still focusing on what really mattered. Subsequent to business school, I was part of the management team of 4 different venture capital and private equity backed companies. We had successful exits, and there, we the essential learning was how to think about incubating products and solutions. How do you think about what might be the best way to think about market understanding and gaps in the market? And how do you align the solutions with what customers might be looking for? And eventually, what are best ways and the most efficient ways in which you can scale some of these businesses from a go-to-market standpoint? I also spent many years as a managing director and partner at a large investment bank. And that was, again, a very entrepreneurial entrepreneurial role because I started essentially from zero clients and we grew all the way to about 30 plus clients in a span of about 7 years. I started the business in South Asia. And that was a very different kind of learning in terms of how to think about doing business across all these different geographies in terms of Asia, Europe, and the US as well. And it's really not just about how do you build products and how do you sell products, but how do you think about complex business environments and how do you think about capital raising strategy from a macro standpoint and ways in which you can optimize across different lines of businesses and different geographies as well. So that was a great learning experience from an investment banking standpoint.
From your bio, right? Especially the connection between music and AI, right? Because both require structure, harmony, improvisation. And I guess as you're approaching into AI, right, you're trying to create intelligent systems that restore balance, unlock human creativity, and drive lasting impact, right? And I think that's very important. So that takes us into really what made you realize you need to build Ebliss AI, and what was the moment that convinced you that the world's ready for it, right?
So I was the president of a software company after investment banking, and that was my foray into the ID infrastructure and the endpoint management space that eBliss is focused on at this point of time. And the company grew really well. We grew almost 5x in ARR in a span of 4 years. I was fortunate enough to acquire many large enterprise customers. While we did that, essentially what we were selling to the customers was a point solution. And I'll step back a minute in terms of what has happened in the world around us from an evolution standpoint. So we are in a world where there's been a rapid explosion in the number of computing devices. Whether you have your cell phones, laptops, tablets, etc., or if you go on the manufacturing shop floor, you have different kinds of robotic devices, or maybe in the retail environments when you have different kinds of point of sale terminals and so on. There's been increasing connectivity. Because of AI, there's more edge computing. There's greater requirements for compliance and security and so on. So all that has increased the complexity of large scale IT systems at an exponential rate. But at the same time, the response to the complexity has largely been highly manual intensive, where humans essentially do almost 95% of the work, and you're surrounded by point tools that are focused mainly on showcasing what might be the symptoms of the problem, not really addressing the root causes in meaningful ways, but essentially focusing on the symptoms of the problems. And then it is left to the humans to really take those symptoms and figure out what the root cause is, and then come up with solutions, and then run these heuristic solutions. And the reason I say heuristic is because for the most part, you don't quite understand what is the root cause. And if you don't understand the root cause, you cannot really solve the problem. So because of this highly reactive, delayed, and human-intensive nature, and the consequence of exponential growth in complexity, the downtime has continued to increase, and all that has led to over $700 billion in terms of higher operating costs, lost productivity, and so on and so forth. So the problem statement has only increased in severity over the last few years, but now we are fortunate enough that we are in the age of agentic AI and so on and so forth, where with the right understanding of the market and the customer and these newly evolved capabilities that we have from an agentic reasoning standpoint, for the first time, we have the right kind of capabilities to make a meaningful impact in terms of the true autonomy that we have discussed earlier, where our objective is to essentially automate the entire process of detection, diagnosis, resolution, and prediction of different kinds of dynamic issues that you might see in these complex IT systems. Essentially taking the current level of automation from 5% to over 60% in quite a few cases. It's where you get a true meaningful impact in terms of decreasing the operating cost, increasing the productivity, and enhancing the experience of end users.
Yeah. So what is your role and mandate?
So I am the founder and CEO of eBliss. Essentially, given the learning that I've had running my previous company and all the different conversations that I've had with multiple large enterprise customers, what we figured out was there is clearly a market need for intelligent solutions that can execute well. And we had the newly evolved set of capabilities that would allow us to do that. And so a combination of the deep relationships that we have had along with the new set of capabilities led us to the formation of eBliss. So I was instrumental in starting the company in 2025. I have a great team in place at this point of time. Truly fortunate to have the support of many large systems integrators and enterprise customers who have joined us on this journey in terms of creating a meaningful impact in the society.
Right. And do you have any specific target segments and use cases, or are you going broad?
So eBliss is essentially a horizontal platform that translates across multiple industry verticals. From a go-to-market standpoint, we do tend to focus on certain industry verticals more than others, where we see a higher incidence of downtime or certain kinds of issues that translate into what could be our near-term focus. So from that standpoint, a near-term focus tends to be industries like manufacturing and retail and so on and so forth, which also tend to have a little bit less regulation compared to some others. But over a period of time, the nature of issues are quite transferable, and the solution also is quite transferable across all the different industry verticals.
Right. So I guess, as you're trying to increase the level of automation, because there's no magic button, right? Especially if you're using AI, and we'll get into some of that. So as you're designing this for your customers, right, and this solution from a AI, ML architecture, tech stack, maybe how are you approaching this from whether it's methodology frameworks, the architecture, platforms, tools? How are you approaching this from a technology perspective to solve this pain point and problem for your customers, right?
So if we start with the high-level framework, which we have outlined, where you need to have compelling ROI. Number two, there has to be ease of adoption, and number three, there has to be safety. Right. So those three are essential elements of a framework for any solution to be adopted and eventually scaled over a period of time. So we have been very deliberate about how we engage in each of these different attributes through the choice of the different building blocks and essentially the different kinds of capabilities that we would bring to bear to execute on this. So firstly, we want to make sure that we integrate really well into the existing tech stack and the workflow of these different large enterprises that we target. So essentially think about eBliss as an autonomy layer that sits on top of the different kinds of devices and the different kinds of tools that enterprises might have in their environment. So it ingests data from multiple endpoints, multiple tools, and multiple applications, essentially. And then the data feeds into our language model. And so we build our own small language models on top of OpenAI and even Anthropic for that matter. We have domain experts who are humans who actually supervise the training of the models. And then we have strict guardrails in place from a safety, transparency, and auditability standpoint to make sure that we are minimizing the unintended consequences of the AI. Then, of course, we have the agentic AI architecture that is used to learn, to essentially reason, execute, and also verify whether the executions have solved the problem or not. So a combination of proprietary data that we get from our customers, coupled with the domain expertise and the guardrails that feeds into the knowledge base, which is again proprietary, that continues to compound over a period of time. And that is where you have a lot of the secret sauce around the different kinds of redactions, diagnosis, resolution, and so on. And then that knowledge base is executed across all the different endpoints in terms of predictively figuring out when the issues are going to happen, and then come up with these dynamic, intelligent solutions to resolve the issues and even predict and come up with predictive actions before the users even notice that these issues are going to happen.
You talked about LLMs, the large language models, right? And those are trained on large, broad data sets, ChatGPT, etc. And now you've talked about small language models, which that's just too much information and they don't have the specific domain knowledge, right? So those are trained on, it could be on a specific vertical, whether it's manufacturing or retail or the customer's information, right? Are you using anything on the predictive side, or are you staying on the large language, the small language model side? Are you integrating any machine learning? How are you approaching that?
Yeah, so essentially to understand, think about understanding the proprietary customer context. What the large language models don't have is access to proprietary customer data, and that is what we have access to, right? And hence essentially the need to create these small language models, right? So we have more and different kinds of data, or more proprietary data compared to any of these large language models. That's number one. Number two, we take this data, and there is also an art and science in terms of how do you actually train these models as well, with the right kind of human domain expertise as well. And then that feeds into the knowledge base that continues to expand over a period of.
Yeah, can you maybe explain a little bit more about, for the folks in the audience, obviously this concept of a knowledge base, right? Because obviously you have different models and you're training and you have different small language models, etc. Maybe articulate a little bit more about that knowledge base and how you're using that.
Right. So essentially, what a knowledge base is a compendium of different kinds of information, what the issues might be, what could be the root causes of these different issues, and what kind of dynamic, intelligent solutions can essentially solve those different root causes. So I'll give you a simple example. Let's say your Outlook is not starting. There could be 9 different reasons as to why your Outlook is not starting. And so Outlook not starting is not even a problem. It's actually the symptom of a problem. Right? So one needs to go multiple levels below and really understand what are the 9 different root causes for why Outlook is not starting in a particular scenario, and then identify as soon as the root cause is triggered, and then have intelligent solutions that address these different root causes. And by the way, the root causes keep on changing on a dynamic basis. They could change almost every week, every time Microsoft releases some kind of a patch. So which means you are in a world where there is a lot of dynamism in terms of how the issues are evolving over a period of time, and then you constantly need to understand the root causes, and then you need to update the root causes, and then based on the root causes, you need to have these intelligent solutions that address those specific root causes. So all this, the detections, the diagnosis, the resolutions, all that is captured and stored into our knowledge base. And the knowledge base keeps on compounding and expanding over a period of time, and hence it is self-learning. So every time we trigger some kind of an automated resolution, the knowledge base learns from it, and then it grows and expands over a period of time.
Yeah, no, that's good, because I think, when I started out my career, I was at Ernst & Young Management Consulting doing technology implementations, taking them from 6 months to down to 90 days, 60 days, 30 days, and you had to map the baseline processes. Then you put the system in, you have to transform the processes, et cetera, right? And then we had to access a knowledge base to figure out, okay, what are the workflows? What are the tools? What do we have to do to improve this, right? So, and to get to that next level of automation, right, the AI has to understand, like you said, what are there's problems with the algorithm or the heuristics or what have you. What are how to be able to diagnose that and resolve that, right? And instead of having a human doing that, now the AI can go and automate that process, right? Once it's been documented, and it can figure out the best path forward, right? And then you take that to an automation level, then hopefully down that escalates into a more sophisticated model. We have an AI agent, and then maybe a multi-agent model. So maybe you can elaborate on that, right?
Sanjay, I want to point out a big difference between automation and autonomy, right? So in our previous world, there was quite a bit of focus on automation for the right reasons. But as we have talked about, the biggest issue is the nature of the issues is dynamic, which means the issues keep on changing over a period of time. And automation by its nature is essentially static. So what you're doing is you're taking a set of issues and you're defining a set of steps or a sequence of steps, and you're executing the same sequence every time. Every time you think that a particular issue has actually happened, And that doesn't really work. And we have seen in large enterprise environments that the effectiveness of these automations is very, very low. And that's precisely why the level of automation is less than 5%, which means less than 5% of the issues are actually solved by these static automations. What we have done is we have pivoted, or we have focused a lot more on autonomy, which is understanding what might be the root causes of these issues as these issues evolve and continue to be dynamic over a period of time, and then coming up with these intelligent solutions, and then verifying that the solutions actually work, and making sure that the solutions are safe and transparent. One of the big things that we do is we have this concept of a run book, which is very, very different, right? So essentially, the run books provide a certain level of transparency and auditability, but the run books are drafted by AI. They're constantly updated over a period of time, and humans are actually involved in terms of supervising these run books if they choose to. And so what you're doing is you're sort of creating a dynamic architecture where you're intelligently coming up with the solutions. Then you give the capability to the humans to come in and supervise and provide the guardrails when they would like, and also perhaps even approve when these solutions can be executed over a period of time, and yet at the same time make sure that you're delivering the right kind of outcomes.
You're exactly right, and thanks for elaborating on that. Because I was stair-stepping that too. Like automation is the base layer, right? In terms of, like as you said, it's static, right? And you're taking some of the basic manual and existing processes and trying to automate it. And then you said if it's the same all the time, but in real life, in real business, nothing's the same all the time, right? There's maybe very few things that are the same, and there may be some standard process versus a short process, right? Then the question is, as you get into agentic, et cetera, at some point it has to be able to think and solve the problem, and as where you get into autonomous remediation, right, which is much more complex. It has to have a higher level of sophistication and intelligence, but also that's where the human in the loop comes in to make sure as you train it to where it is completely autonomous, where it doesn't need in most cases a human in the loop, because it's built in the governance models and the guardrails to make sure it's resolving it in a proper manner, right?
That's correct. That is absolutely the case. And we have a tremendous focus on the guardrails. We make sure that is a very, very high priority for us, and that continues to be a top focus area even for a lot of the customers, essentially. And one of the big reasons why we haven't seen transformational innovation from a lot of the big players in this space is mainly because they, for a variety of reasons, it's lack of uh, a combination of courage and capability to address a combination of um, these guardrails, and at the same time through transformational innovation that comes from the right kind of expertise, the architecture, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and then also your systems are plugging in to other enterprise systems, right? And there's a question of security, especially if things are doing things autonomously, right? Maybe there may be principles around least privilege, or making sure, when an agent becomes too smart, there's a principal agent problem, right? Um, how do you ensure from a security perspective? What's your approach on a security perspective to make sure that you're adhering to that quality? Because you're talking about that. This is evolution. A lot of people don't have the ethics or thinking about this stuff, right? And how are you approaching that?
Exactly. And so we have a clearly defined matrix, right, where we say on one axis you have the impact that a particular step is creating from an ROI standpoint. Second is what is the risk or the unintended consequence of executing that particular automation, right? And we work very closely with our customers and our partners to kind of put the right kind of guardrails, and also give them the right kind of privileges and approvals, so they can actually pick and choose what kind of automations can be executed on an autonomous basis without their approval, and which of them actually would need their approval in the context of the enterprise setting. So while we have the ability to enable autonomy, we actually make sure that it is surrounded by the right kind of approval system and guardrails. And of course, in case we do have any unintended consequences, we have the ability to roll back the automations as well. So that also is an integral part of the functionality in terms of making sure that the solution is deployable, scalable, yet also safe.
Cool. Let's shift gears from technology a little bit. What about the AI Space podcast resonate with you and say, hey, I'd like to be a guest on the show?
Well, one of the biggest hallmarks of your show, Sanjay, is while you do focus on the technology aspects of it and the large scale macro aspects, it is also grounded in terms of what it takes from an execution standpoint to deliver real value to customers. So it brings about the combination of macro trends, the technology pieces, and also the execution details, which I think is very, very important in terms of being able to not only think about where the world is headed, but in terms of what are the building blocks of it and what it takes to create impact at scale. And that is truly exciting about this show.
No, I appreciate that because, after 30 years of experience, I say, hey, I need to get in this AI space. It was like 3 years ago. I turned 50 3 years ago. I'm going to be 53 this year. And I said, I need to figure this out. I don't want to be in this corporate cycle anymore. So I started my AI consulting business and someone reached out to me about a podcast. I said, I need to give back. I'm sure other people trying to figure out this AI space. So why don't I invite founders, technologists, innovators that are actually building the space and focusing on, like you said, real ROI, right? Because that's great to have all this theory and all this cool AI art and stuff, but how does someone make a living out of this or build a business, build a legacy, impact the family and society, right? So I thank you for coming on here and sharing your insights and, taking your rich experience and how you're combining, I think, both the technology and the human aspect of it into a meaningful impact, right?
Absolutely. And clearly, our purpose and vision at eBliss is very simple. So we want to focus on the low-hanging fruit and essentially provide autonomous capabilities to enterprises and humans so that humans can focus on what really matters to them, which is progress, innovation, and essentially bliss over a period of time, hence the word eBliss.
Yeah. Well, before we continue, where's the best place for folks to follow you? LinkedIn, etc.?
Well, they can certainly visit our website. It's eBlissAI.com. And they can also follow me on LinkedIn. We do post a lot of the updates there with respect to the company, with respect to macro trends, and also with respect to the kind of impact that we are creating for our customers and partners.
Yeah, everyone make sure to connect with Shirish, eBliss, follow them, etc. Definitely like, comment, subscribe to the AI Space podcast because that helps us to grow the show and have more amazing guests like Shirish. And if you're stuck in your business, you can book a 15-minute meeting with me to move forward. A lot of folks are around focus on technology and etc. But I'd like this show to be a little bit more holistic, right? As from a business perspective. So from a vision, mindset, strategy perspective, what do you see as the critical insights for long-term success?
I would say based on what I've seen over the last several years running multiple businesses and companies, it's essentially a combination of three things, right? So make sure that you have the right kind of long-term purpose, and that essentially needs to be tied to creating significant impact for humans and the society at large. Uh, Make sure that we have the right kind of focus on the short to medium term problem that you are solving and we have a compelling solution in place. And the way to get there is through rapid experimentation cycles. So essentially, it is really the process and how you evolve in terms of better understanding the process of experimentation. And number three, it is getting the right kind of team in place. It's all about making sure that you have the right kind of collaboration, the right kind of accountability, and a culture that is not averse to taking risks. So a combination of purpose, short-term experimentation cycles in terms of solving these problems, and collaboration and team building is what I think is essential for long-term success.
No, I think that's important because, a lot of people say, just dream and it'll happen. If you're sitting around dreaming, nothing's going to happen, right? You have to start with the dream or the vision, right? But what you said is about, it has to be followed with daily action. And you said about experimentation. You said about building the right teams. Maybe elaborate that, in terms of the success that you've had, what were the actions that you took to be successful, right?
Well, so think about any company as a series of experiments, right? So, you start thinking about, when you're starting a company, you're starting with some understanding of why you would want that company to exist. Essentially, you understand some kind of a pain point or a problem statement in the market. So you need to test your hypothesis. A, you need to come up with an hypothesis. And B, you need to test the hypothesis. And that again requires a series of experiments. So maybe talking to different kinds of customers or getting rapid feedback. And then, you start um, the process of building a company. And then, of course, you have to engage in these iterative cycles of perhaps coming up with a prototype, showcasing the prototype to different kinds of customers, getting rapid feedback, and so on and so forth. And then, a founder is essentially always in the process of attracting investors, the right kind of customers, and more importantly, the right kind of collaborators and employees as well. So that is the next level of experimentation that you need to go through in terms of making sure that you have the right kind of people on board who are aligned with your vision and who fit from a culture standpoint, right? And then comes the phase of building the first version of the solution, and then you're sort of going through the product market fit essentially. And so again, that is also a phase where you have series of experiments that you're engaging in, and then you sort of iterate with respect to the different features and functionality and so on and so forth. And it's very important to have like-minded, um, uh, you know, innovative, early adopter um, customers that you're talking to initially, and that's where the relationships also come into play in terms of getting the right feedback loops and in terms of making sure that you're incorporating the feedback in a rapid manner. So all these are essentially series of experiments, and once you've achieved the product market fit, then comes the scaling phase where you're essentially making sure that you have a replicable model that you can put in place from a go-to-market and a sales cycle standpoint. And that's where we need a paradigm which essentially compounds not just the capabilities, but also the relationships and the trust over a period of time, because that's what leads to eventual scalability and true impact in the society.
For those founders out there and startups out there, like getting started or struggling to get their first clients, right? What insights from a sales and marketing perspective do you have to approaching getting your first level of clients, right?
So, firstly, have a good understanding or a deep understanding of what is the problem that you're solving and why there isn't the right kind of solution out there from a competitive standpoint that is able to address that particular problem. Right? Number two, have at least a handful of really good relationships with the customers or the kinds of target customers that you're really going after. And one thing that I've always uh, emphasized on is don't build a solution in isolation. Always have a customer in mind and start with the customer as opposed to starting with a technology or a product, right? And so you start with the customer, you start with the problem statement, and then based on the problem statement, you come up with a prototype, and then you showcase the prototype to a handful of customers, not one customer, but at least a handful of customers, because you want to make sure that the feedback is representative of the market and not of one particular customer. And I think it's a combination of diversification in terms of feedback, the relationships, and a strong customer and market focus that lends itself the right kind of base structure that you need in order to start and grow a company.
Yeah, I think it's important to build those relationships, do the client research, engage to find out, if the features that you're building resonates with those customers, and they may say, hey, I like X, Y, and Z, but these other ones I'm not going to pay for, right? So it helps you prune your solution, etc. I'm sure once you get past the initial relationships and you're showing some prototypes, unless the thing goes viral and, etc. But then there's a little bit of brute force too, right? You probably have to do some lead gen and some outreach to get that, right? So how's that process? Maybe some insights around that.
So right, so usually what we've seen is it's a combination of some customers where you have the right kind of relationships where they can provide early feedback, as well as some outreach that you might do. But again, even for the outreach, there needs to be a thesis in place around what is the problem statement, what is the solution, and you should have tested the thesis at least with some early customers. So I think while there is always the need to do this cold outreach at some point of time, I think it's best if the cold outreach is a part of a broader strategy, which is around getting feedback from customers that you have relationships with, and then you can do this cold outreach on the side where you can test out the hypothesis with a wider range of potential customers.
I think it's very important insight there because people race to the cold outreach. And, I've worked with some clients like that too. And take a step back, what is your vision? What are you trying to achieve? What's a pain point? What is your offer? How are you going to message that? What's your results mechanism? Are you articulating that in a way that resonates with the customers, that they're willing to hand over money and pay on a repeated basis? And that's the hardest part. And once you figure that out, the rest becomes easier, right? And so once we get into that next stage, you've alluded to this in the beginning too, and especially streamlining operations and scaling a business, right? You've built relationships, you're experimenting, but at some point you need to probably prune or eliminate some relationships and or activities, right? Or also explore and build new relationships and activities, right? So what are your insights around operations and scaling a business, right? Streamlining operations and scaling a business.
Absolutely. So I think there is always an evolution of who your target customers are. Right. So perhaps the customers where you have the right kind of relationships to start off with, they perhaps may not be the right kind of customers as your company evolves over a period of time, but they're clearly they could be the beachhead customers for a company, at least in its initial phase, right? And so there has to be a focus on and radical honesty about what is it that you're attempting to do for a certain set of customers initially, and whether you're able to deliver ROI to those customers. A lot of companies that I've seen, and I mentored quite a few founders as well, they make the mistake of saying that they want to start an AI company. Right? I always tell them, don't focus on starting an AI company. Focus on solving a customer's problem, and focus on where the pain point is in the market. And if it so turns out that AI capabilities are needed in order to solve the customer's problem, then so be it. Then you have the right kind of alignment and the marriage between the customer's requirements and what your aspirations are from a capability standpoint. Right? But then going back, I think there will be evolution in terms of the target customers, the target partners, the right kind of employees and capabilities that you need in every stage of the company's growth. So there has to be a constant series of experiments that we have talked about, and clear definition around what is the objective, what is the input, and what is the process that the company is going to lead in terms of figuring out if that experiment is going to be successful.
You've come from the builder side and the investor side, right? And say maybe somebody's mid-stage company that, they got past the initial seed and A round or whatever, right? And they're looking to get that next level of funding from from operations and scaling, right? What do you look from that hat? What do you think investors are looking for to give that next level of funding to get them to that next level, right?
Well, there are clearly defined milestones for every stage, right? For instance, if you're at the pre-seed stage, then typically the milestone tends to be, do you have the right kind of, or at least some kind of a compelling vision in terms of the market that you're going after, the problem statement, the pain point, some high-level schematic of the solution, and some kind of team in place. And then if you want to graduate to the seed stage, then there has to be some kind of customer traction and so on and so forth. So similarly, at Series A, you most likely achieved a product market fit, and then you're trying to scale that across a variety of customers. And then Series B onwards, it's really more about rapid scaling. And then how do you perhaps enable or scale that product market fit across multiple verticals, or what multiple types of customers, and so on and so forth. So there are clearly defined sort of benchmarks in place in terms of how you graduate from one stage to the next. And that's what the founders should really focus on as they navigate this whole fundraising process.
Thank you for that perspective. We always talk about, it's not just only about business and technology, the show. Some of the other topics, one of the others is democratization. So what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities in making AI accessible to founders and businesses from a variety of industries and experiences, backgrounds? How can we bridge this gap? Well, obviously, AI is a great equalizer, but what are your thoughts on this?
So we've always had a view that AI is not going to take away the jobs. I think the human jobs will be taken away. A human is going to lose a job to someone who is going to adopt AI better. And I think as AI focuses a lot more on the low-hanging fruit, in our case, the L1, L2 kind of issues, which are sort of mundane, repetitive, and so on and so forth, which I believe humans probably don't really enjoy fixing anyways. We want humans to focus more on what really matters to them over a period of time, which is complex problem solving, creativity, the right kind of relationships, and so on and so forth. So I think as if humans are more amenable and accepting in terms of focusing on areas that truly matter and they really enjoy over a period of time, I think that's going to lead to tremendous productivity increase and in fact better quality of life for the society as a whole. And that is what our aspiration is.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think unlocking, the more creative and innovative side is great. But unfortunately, there will be a lot of jobs, especially the things that can be easily automated, that can go. And there are segments of the population that are not interested in the creative and innovative side. So I think as a society, we're going to have to come to grips with that in the future. There are going to be people that are not willing or able to transition into AI, right? And if there is a larger amount of unemployment, there are some dystopian scenarios. I think those are things we'll have to figure out and start planning for, right?
That is correct. And so there will be, like any other disruptive technologies, there will be some disruptions within the short to medium term. And it becomes very, very important for us as a society to have the right kind of reskilling programs in place, perhaps the right kind of social safety nets as well, so that in the period of disruption and displacement, we there is the right kind of risk mitigation framework and a path towards a new future, which is driven by reskilling and new kinds of opportunities that will become available essentially. So AI, while it might take away some kind of roles for humans, it will expose many other new roles for these humans to be a part of. And I think as a society, we will be better off if we were to sort of, instead of fighting, adopting and embarking on that journey so that there is productivity and the productivity lends itself into better quality of living and the benefits are shared across the society as a whole. And that will require sort of the right kind of governance models, policies as well, where there is the right kind of distribution of income across the society so that we are better off.
Yeah, this is just more of a statement, not seeking the answer for this, because even in today's world, right, there's people like the Sentinelese, like in the Andaman Islands, that are still hunter gatherers, right? And so there's, we have that, and we have the AI futurists, right? So there's going to be everyone in between that will have to kind of figure out. Other aspect is you've already brought this up in quite a bit is in the conversation, right? We talk about ethical and responsible AI. How can we balance AI innovation with responsible development? The reason is the funny part about this question is that I thought everyone, I want to bring up this awareness, but a lot of people don't care about this. So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about this?
We've had a very, very conscious focus on transparency and auditability as a part of our solution architecture. And we have heard from a lot of our customers and partners that that is, in fact, a very, very important area for them. In fact, while there is attraction in terms of the potential ROI that these intelligent self-healing solutions can provide, there is a lot of nervousness about what the unintended consequences might be because of AI going bad or it being out of control as such. And a lot of the innovation we've seen has could be hampered and has been hampered in many cases because of these concerns around the unintended consequences. So rather than ignore the consequences, what we have done is we've taken a very conscious effort in terms of being in front of it and being proactive about incorporating the concerns and hence mitigation strategies through the right kind of guardrails, transparency mechanisms, auditability, and so on and so forth, so that it provides comfort and a feeling of ease to our enterprise customers and partners as well. So I think ethical AI is a very important concept. It's here to stay, and I think it's important for people and organizations to recognize that if you don't address it head on, there will be significant negative consequences down the road, which could derail all the potential benefits that you might hope to get from these AI deployments.
Yeah, I think one of the hidden reasons I found out later after I started the show was that maybe to raise the awareness, no alarm bells, but There are good things. There are some disturbing things coming down the pike. How do we build this responsibly and ethically? And I think those are important questions we have to ask ourselves. And, as especially in autonomous remediation, right? You don't want to where these AI tools and agents become so sentient and intelligent that they can rewrite the rules and the handbooks and their privilege access, right? But we're coming up on time. Any concluding thoughts, insights, encouragements to those that are getting into the space, struggling to build their business?
AI is going to be transformative. It is going to be an integral part of our everyday lives going forward. And I would just go back to what we discussed earlier, which is there will be a lot of transformation that will happen, most of it in a positive way. That there will be some short-term disruptions as well. But I think it's an opportunity for significant value creation for entrepreneurs. It's an opportunity for significant enhancement in the quality of life for the society as a whole. Uh, but at the same time, we need to be careful about making sure that we have a managed risk management framework for any of the unintended consequences as well, and a combination of attractive ROI plus making sure that there is ease of adoption and the right kind of safety mechanisms will lead to true transformative value over a period of time.
Yeah, no, this show is definitely about ROI and impact. So thanks for coming on the show, sharing your journey, what eBliss AI is building. Right. Once again, we're coming out on time, but where is the best place for listeners to connect with you, follow the company, etc.?
Right. And so you can always follow us on LinkedIn. We have a eBliss AI webpage, in addition to our website. And then we also have a YouTube channel where we post any of the upcoming demos as well. And then you can always send us an email at info@eblissai.com.
Awesome. Well, everyone make sure to check out and connect with Shirish, eBliss AI. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify or Apple. Shirish, I learned quite a bit from this episode. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. I'm Sanjay Kalluvilayil, creator and host for the show and founder and CEO of Stonehouse Advisors. I hope you gained a wealth of game-changing, real-world insights to grow, transform, and scale to new levels and dimensions leveraging AI. See you all next time.